But they don't know how to be Indians either. So there's really no place for them there. They're not comfortable being Indians. This is in large part. There are always, of course, exceptions to this. If exceptions prove rules, and we're talking about the rules, now you place them in an absolutely impossible position, materially in society, but more psychologically in terms of identity. Tell you something about those residential schools too. That's the main crux of the process, and that accounts for the ongoing residential school syndrome that people talk about. That's real. Recursive trauma, endemic trauma over a sustained period creates an intractable condition that accounts for a whole lot of the maladies in Native communities right now. But there's another piece that they don't like to talk about much, which is that Duncan Campbell Scott, who ran that system up here, acknowledged in the mid-1920s that 1 in every 2 children being sent into the schools was not living long enough to enjoy the benefits. 50%. That's according to the head guy. Now he was right, he was wrong, but that was the official assessment. And these were essentially, in a lot of cases, labor camps because the kids were put to work, both as an educational experience. You know, you're going to learn to work, the virtue of work, good Christian sort of thing, but also we don't want to spend a lot of money on you, so you need to be growing your own food, you need to be generating things, products, whether it's firewood or fence posts or whatever it is that you're laboring on in order to underwrite your own incarceration, which is a penal model, if you want to think about it. Basically, these are child labor camps. Well, you've got some other labor camps that you can do some comparison to. I said death camps and concentration camps are not the same thing. But you've heard of some of the concentration camps, so let's just detach them from Auschwitz and Sobibor. Dachau, for example. The Nazis were running concentration and labor facilities, and these were concentration and labor facilities we're talking about here now. Dachau, which is notorious. Dachau had a death rate of 33%. That's a notorious Nazi concentration camp, and the mortality rate was 17% less on the official accounting than in these well-intentioned residential schools in Canada. I had one for Buchenwald, and I went back and checked it 3 times, 19%, which is catastrophically high. But 19% was compared to 50%. The very worst mortality in a Nazi concentration or labor camp was Mauthausen, that's 66%. The worst the Nazis had to offer was 16% greater mortality rate in the residential schools. Let that one soak in. I told you these overlap. Situation in states where it's not so well documented, they still can't locate certain key files and so forth. And you haven't had the juridical processing and so on down there that we have up here. The United States is still maintaining the wall of silence kind of response. We have you got to find it pretty much the same because the apportionment of budget and so forth to support those schools, by and large, identical. And the Canadian schools were patterned after U.S. schools. Ministry of Indian and Northern Affairs sent a little delegation down to the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania to check out what Captain Pratt was doing. That was the prototype. And they came back up to Canada and said, he's onto something, let's do it here too. Now you have antecedents in both countries, but this model of a residential industrial school, the agricultural schools and all that really comes off of Pratt's model. So you can expect the conditions are going to be similar. But here's one for you, so you can all feel like good Canadians up here, you know. I'll do a little U.S. bashing, that's what gets me into the country. Okay, Canadian. Immigration officials smile, say you're back, go to it, guy. You know, beat on the U.S. a little more. Pop quiz. How many people survived a 10-year sentence on a U.S. chain gang in the 7 southern states between 1880 and 1934-35 when they pretty much abandoned them? stab at that one? How many survivors of a 10-year sentence? Okay, none. Not one. Nobody survived 10 years in a U.S. labor camp. There weren't many, but there were people who were in the Calvary 10 years and walked out. So you can kind of see the denial again. We talk a lot about the horrors of the Nazi camps. And that's not wrong. Those horrors are real. But that focus is to prevent people from looking at the counterparts right here where we live. Okay, that's a little different definition. Whether you're in actual international legal codification of the crime of genocide or the 52 implementation statute in Canada. But by the time I went and testified in McPherson's court, the 52 implementation statute had been reformed. That happened in 1986, either 85 or 86, but I think 86. They reformed it. And the reform was they deleted sterilization from the list of prohibited activities. Now, their argument was they were incorporating only things that applied to Canada, but what they deleted was systematic killing of members of the target group and the infliction of serious psychological harm. Okay? Excuse me. What they retained was killing. Bringing about a physical destruction of the group and sterilization. In other words, what they retained in the law in 1952 were exactly those things that Canada was not doing, or at least not on an appreciable scale. What they deleted were those things that Canada not only was doing, but that Canada intended to continue doing. Forced transfer of children, residential schools ran. When did they close the last of the residential schools?
1988.
See? So you had another 28 years to go there. They ain't going to be shutting down, so they simply deleted that from the list of crimes. If we're doing it, it's not a crime. If we're not doing it, it can be. We'll prohibit it. Well, when they delete sterilization in 86, following that logic, it suggests that they implemented a program of compulsory sterilization. I don't have the goods on that. It's something for y'all to look at, because that applies to Canada, not states. That's where you are, not me. Except when I'm up here to bash the U.S. Okay? I could run down the entire list. I've already done this to a certain extent. I could run through all 5 of those policy trajectories and show how it applies both in the U.S. and Canada to Indian policy, the history of interaction. But genocide's never happened here. Even if you took it to killing the way McPherson did. Anybody ever heard of scalp bounty? You know what a scalp bounty is? We're in Ontario. We're right in the French in Eastern Canada where these apply. Everywhere from here to the Maritimes. And every U.S. state and territory and antecedent colony. At one time or several, scalp bounties were declared by the settler government, which is the payment in hard cash for proof of death of a native person, any native person. They were not usually looking for any particular native person. Prove you killed an Indian by bringing scalp, usually with both ears attached, so you couldn't defraud the taxpayers. Scalp the same person twice, and you'd have both ears attached dangling off there. Okay? And it was on a graduated scale usually. Not originally, they didn't quite think of this originally, but this became a business. They were actually color coding and bailing and sending back to England the proof of death of mass numbers of Indians. Red meant one thing, yellow meant one thing. They just painted on the inside of the scalp. They were dried and stretched and put in bales for count, just like beaver pelts.